Ladies and gentlemen, comrades of dissent and disparagers of the status quo, it is with a certain impish glee that I turn my attention to the subject of anarchism, a philosophy that insists on throwing Molotov cocktails at the edifice of civilization in the hope of watching it burn to ash, only to sow seeds in the ruins. Anarchism, that most adolescent of political persuasions, where every acolyte imagines themselves a Sacco or Vanzetti, sans the inconvenience of actually having to suffer for one's convictions. Now, it must be said, there is something almost charming in a naive Peter Pan sort of way about the anarchists' refusal to grow up and accept the complex realities of governance. They would have us believe that simply by wishing away the state, we can all suddenly live in harmonious self-regulation. It's as if by chanting, "No gods, no masters," the beasts of our baser instincts would roll over and play dead. Forgive me if I don't share this juvenile optimism. Anarchism, while noble in its distrust of authority, is woefully inadequate in its grasp of human nature. To believe that we can operate without some form of organized governance is to ignore the bloody lessons of history, which show us that power abhors a vacuum even more than nature does. Remove the state and you don't get a bucolic utopia. You get a brute's paradise. The anarchist will tell you that any form of power structure is inherently oppressive, and they are not entirely wrong. The state can be a vile monopolizer of violence, a strangler of freedom, a kleptocracy masquerading as a republic. But the alternative offered by the anarchists is not freedom. It is the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest, the tyranny of the mob or the gang. It is, to put it bluntly, a recipe for disaster dressed up as a daydream. The anarchist ideal suffers from a fatal flaw. It presupposes that we can do away with hierarchical structures altogether. But hierarchies are not just imposed from above, they arise naturally. They are emergent properties of any social organism. To ignore this is not just foolish, it is to play dice with the very idea of civilization. To my anarchist friends, I say this: by all means continue to rail against the injustices of the state with the fervor of a Bakunin or a Kropotkin, but be wary of what you wish for. In your zeal to tear down the walls, remember that what comes after may be worse than what came before. It's all well and good to dream of a stateless society where mutual aid and voluntary cooperation reign supreme, but it's quite another to grapple with the grim realities such a society would face. In the end, anarchism is a bit like cheap liquor, intoxicating in the moment, but bound to leave you with a hangover of regret. The sobering truth is that we need structure. We need some semblance of order if we are to avoid descending into chaos. And while the state is an imperfect vehicle for this, it is the best we've managed to come up with so far. Before we stride too confidently toward our concluding thoughts, it is essential to acknowledge a fascinating wrinkle in this tapestry, one that the mathematical realm of game theory has laid bare. It has been demonstrated with a certain elegance and irrefutable logic that cooperative groups, those clusters of individuals who engage in mutual aid and shared strategies for the common good, will, in the long run, outcompete groups that are riven by selfishness and internal strife. The algorithms and models of game theory illuminate this truth, that cooperation is not just a moral or aesthetic choice, but a superior evolutionary strategy. In scenarios modeled after the famed prisoner's dilemma, it is the groups that develop trust and reciprocal altruism that rise above, while the purely self-interested cabals inevitably falter and collapse. This revelation offers a glimmer of hope, a mathematical testament to the potential strength of collectivism. But even with this in mind, even armed with this knowledge, the anarchist's vision still stumbles when faced with the practical application of such cooperative ideals on the sprawling, messy stage of real-world human societies. So let us not be seduced by the siren song of anarchism, which promises a world without rulers, but delivers only a world without rules. Instead, let us work to temper the excesses of authority, to hold the feet of the powerful to the fire, and to expand the sphere of personal liberty. But let's not delude ourselves into thinking that smashing the state will free us from the shackles of oppression. In all likelihood, it will just forge new ones.